Hi everyone, Nick here from Better Tell It. I'm a bit sick, so my voice is different. I hope that doesn't spoil the story. Now please, enjoy. Alright, if you really want to know what happened in the Pacific Northwest, I'll tell you the way I told the guys on my team when we were packing up the van after it was over. No dramatics, no report, speak, just what I saw, what I smelled, and how close it got. My name's Sam Goodson. I'm out of Wichita originally. In my day job, meaning the one I can't put on a resume, I'm part of a unit that officially doesn't exist. We don't wear patches. We don't ask for medals. We get called when something is taking people and the explanations don't work. We go in, we find the missing if they're findable, and we make sure the taking stops. That's about as much as I can tell you without a stack of paper and a black marker. Spring, calm weather, Olympic Peninsula, green dripping woods, cedar breath, the kind of quiet that feels like it absorbs sound instead of carrying it. That's where this one was. A half dozen hikers missing over 3 months, disappeared off well-used trails, no gear recovered. On top of that, a rush of livestock incidents circling the edges, goats and sheep with 2 neat punctures under the throat, blood gone like somebody siphoned it. Locals blamed cougars, a few said coyotes, but nobody who's cleaned up after a real coyote kill would have mistaken those carcasses. A cougar is messy like a crime of passion. This looked like a mad problem. When the call came, I had to blow off gym day. Bench was finally feeling good again. Not a complaint, just a detail. The only reason I mention it is because it's funny what your body remembers after a job. The smell of old sweat in a van, the weight of a vest, how your wrists feel after you've hauled steel crates down tunnels all day. That kind of work stays with you. We set up in a decommissioned radar station the Forrest service uses as a communications relay. They called it Station Alder on the paperwork. Concrete galleries, a buried operations room with a single entrance, and old Cold War bones that still had a good heartbeat in terms of power. It was perfect for us because it had one way in and one way out, and because if we had to contain something, we could do it without explaining ourselves to tourists. There were 6 of us, me, Cole, team lead, 30 pounds of stoic packed into a wide back and neat haircut, Miller, wiry, robed veins, always smiling when he shouldn't be, Alvarez, field medic, calm like a pond, Quinn, tech, could make a drone out of a stapler and a prayer, and Latham, the quiet guy who was good with locks and lines. We also had 2 civilians embedded, Dr. Sue, biologist, contract, and a behavior specialist named Ruben, who didn't tell us his last name. Everyone's got a job. Mine is close in, containment and hands-on. If it has to be wrestled, netted or coaxed into a steel box, I get the nod. We rolled in on a Tuesday. The sky was white, not clouds exactly, just a dome of milk light that made the greens deeper. Calm, no wind, you could hear water talking in the ravines. Quinn got out cameras up before lunch, thermal on poles 30 meters out, motion lines stitched through the sail, little pinhole lenses with low light tucked into 3 knots like blinking insects. Inside, he stacked monitors until it looked like a security office in a casino. 12 screens, 5 angles each, a fishbowl view of our perimeter, and the feed from the forest edges where the last hikers had gone missing. We baited 1 line, that's the ugly part, with 2 goats from a local who didn't ask questions. I don't like using live bait, but you stack the ethics against how many people a thing is taking and you make a call. That night, We did a scent run, just a circle around the station, checking for scat, blood, any sign that something had passed. Quinn flew a drone thermal low over the tree line. At 2 in the morning, a cold spot crossed the service road. 4 limbs close together, chest low, head down. Not cougar, not coyote. Too big and too precise. Xu said the word none of us wanted to hear spoken out loud in that place. Chupacabra. I've read the files, the old ones. I pulled them from a cabinet in a room without windows the first time I got clearance enough to open drawers. Puerto Rico, mid-19s, small bodies, spines, like a porcupine laid down flat, eyes like tail lights, teeth arranged like a mangled zipper. Mexico, early 2000s. Canine signature, bodies, hairless, cracked skin, more scavenger than phantom. The arguments go back and forth, one creature, many variations, 2 different animals wearing the same myth because bloodless livestock is a neat hook. Some of the case photos looked like mange, some didn't. Some things you can debunk, some things you can't. The best line I ever read in a file was written in a pencil margin. There is a reason people reaching for superstition keep landing on the same shapes. Let me be clear, the thing we found wasn't an alley dog with no hair. It wasn't a cougar with a dental defect. It was a calculation. You know that prickly feeling when your brain recognizes an animal built to do one specific job very, very well. That. We saw it first in the cameras. It was just before dawn when Quinn hissed, movement. One of the goats lifted its head like it heard an electric fence. On the edge of one camera frame, a sliver of darker gray against charcoal, a shape stopped, not skulking, studying. There was a line about its back that looked wrong, like a strip of wet leaves rucked into spines. The head angled, eyes reflecting like lit beads. It did not blink, it did not pant. When it moved, it was like someone peeled it off the frame and laid it down in the next. If you've watched cats move when they don't want sound, a ghostly glide, it had that. But there was something almost human in the shoulders, the way they seemed to hitch before it committed to the next patch of shadow. We didn't go out to meet it. That was the point of bait and cameras. You let it show you its patience. And it had patience. It watched those goats for 10 minutes, didn't spook when a moth pinched one of the lenses, didn't twitch when a fly lit on its ear. It waited until the tether of the far goat pulled taut, so the animal's throat extended, and then it was on it. No roar, no snarl, just a stitcher's motion, a rapid head strike, and a set of shoulders that locked. The goat went stiff the way prey goes when surprise is the whole weapon. Then blood went slack. You could see it in the color of the neck skin. I didn't know that was a thing until I saw it. We moved on rehearsed cues. Net team to the left, trunk team to the right, lights on a delayed strobe. The idea was to blind the central cones, force the creature to look away while we closed and pinned. Creature, by the way, isn't me being dramatic, it's the column name of the forums. On there, the floodlights popped. Miller and I came up from cover, net between us. I was at the left anchor, Miller right. The thing released the goat and, for the first time, we saw its mouth open. You don't forget that. Teeth, sure, but behind the teeth, a second set of structures, like tiny syringes. People think suck the blood means little vampire canines. It's easier to imagine it that way. What we saw was more like a specialized tongue with barbs, with grooves that could pull fluid in. Xu had a name for it later. Capillary action combined with muscular pulsing. At the time, all I thought was, no wonder nothing's left at the scene. I went left and he went right, and we dropped the net. If you've never been under a capture net, imagine a chain link fence with your life depending on how fast you can think while dragging it. The creature hit the mesh like a sprung beat bear trap and rolled. It didn't scream, it made a noise like wet paper tearing, high and deep at the same time. Latam came in with the pole, looped, tightened. Alvarez had the trunk ketamine and the proprietary cocktail that makes lawyers nervous, and put 2 darts low into the flank. People are always surprised these things can be drugged. They think anything weird means immune. The truth is almost everything with a heartbeat has a slot you can pour chemistry into. You just have to find it before it finds your throat. Talking about first encounter, you need to picture it right. We were on the ground, that net tightening as it lunged, those spines scraping like someone running a rake backward on sheet metal. The smell was copper and something sour, sulfur, old hair. It didn't claw at us, it probed. That's the word, long fingers with pads, like a possum's hand, slipping into the net, looking for edges, testing tension, then darting back. It wanted to learn, and it wanted to learn fast. That felt like the most dangerous thing about it. 2 minutes and the drug started to work. The shoulders went loose, the head sagged. Quinn brought the aluminum crate up. It had a rubberized floor and bolt plates for a collar we didn't wind up using because nobody there wanted to get close enough to buckle anything around that neck twice. And we levered the thing inside. It still tried to push at the edges when the door came down. It made eye contact through the slats with me, flat and forward, and I knew it wasn't done with us. You can tell when something's finishing fighting. It sings. This one memorized. We rolled the crate to the station and got into the biggest cell we had, which was an old equipment room with upgraded with composite panels and a viewing window, double paint, polycarbonate, half-inch air gap. I know because I measured it myself. Inside there was a water line we could trigger with a remote, and the ceiling vent with a grate the size of a dinner plate, because we're not stupid. It woke around noon. That was the second time I saw those eyes, not on camera, but with glass between us and it. Red like an animal in a flash photo, but alive. The kind of red you see when sun hits your lids. It didn't pace. You expect pacing. It set itself against the far wall, flexed its hands, and pressed one finger to the composite like it was testing for temperature. Xu murmured something about sensory pits. The spines along its back rose and fell like seagrass in a tide, ripple and settle, ripple and settle. Then it did the thing that kept me from sleeping right for a week. It blinked sideways, membranes washing the eyes like windscreen wipers, and lifted its head slowly until its gaze sat square on the viewing window. It could see us through the glass, sure, but it did more than see. It counted. We had a protocol for that. Curtains on the window, open only when we needed to observe. We shut them. Xu started taking notes. Ruben said something about the cognitive presence of predators and how intelligence is usually the last thing anyone wants to see in a hungry mouth. Miller joked about filing for hazard pay. Alvarez asked if he wanted food in the cell. No one laughed. By mid-afternoon, calm settled in. That's the weird thing about these days. For a while, you can imagine you've done the hard part. You think the rest is paperwork and waiting for the transfer truck and a handshake with whoever's going to sign the chain of custody form. You forget how often the hard part waits for quiet. Outside, the trees barely moved. You could hear drops occasionally, leftover rain falling off cedar skirts. In the station, the fluorescent lights hummed like polite insects. We split shifts. Quinn took the desk, eyes on screens. I went to the armory to clean a folded bolt and think about steak. The goats, there was one alive. It made a small sound, that tight little neighbor noise animals make when they're trying not to be noticed anymore. Around 5, Quinn called out in a voice that snapped all of us to our feet. You should see this. On the monitors, cell 1, the one with our guest, was empty. No, not empty. The creature had positioned itself on the blind spot between two cameras, center of the ceiling, pressed flat against the panel join like a gecko. It had its hands in the seam, slow, slow, slow. You wouldn't notice it if you scanned, only if you stared, let your eyes rest, and saw the tiny change in shadow where a spine trembled as the creature breathed. Curtain? Cole said. Curtain's closed, Quinn said. It shouldn't know we're watching. Then it knows cameras, Ruben said. He sounded impressed, like a professor finding a new footnote. I wanted to put his head under cold water. We watched it work for 10 minutes. 10. It didn't rush. It lifted the panel a quarter inch, held it there, listened, dropped it softly if anything in the station changed. We did a look down of the vent system. The panel it was working wasn't vent, it was just a seam. The room beyond was a cable conduit stacked with insulated lines and one of the grounded main feeds. Why that seam? I asked. Heat, Sue said. He pointed to the thermal screen. Through the wall the main feed was riding high. Our lights, our laptops, the bank of cameras, all sipping at the same copper vein. It didn't need the heat, it needed the signal. We moved, not fast like panic, fast like people who've learned the right speed to live. Cole had keys out. I had gloves on without deciding to. Latham went to the breaker room to stand by. We opened the curtain and the creature dropped to the floor, like it had never been on the ceiling. It stood very still, fingers flexed, the spines along its back lifted until they formed a comb. A moment later, a hair-thin spark skipped from one spine to the next, then to the wall. Static popping like a sweater pulled over a face in winter. The cameras glitched just once, like a blink, and came back. Don't do that again, Quinn said to the monitor, like talking to the screen would help. He rerouted the camera to a battery backup, slapped the side of a housing like that made it angry enough to work harder. At 5:22 p.m., the lights went out. Not all of them. The ones we controlled stayed. The ones on the perimeter, that grid of little eyes out in the trees, went black. The screens blurred into snow and then returned one by one on the battery string. And, in that 30 seconds between dark and half-lit, the creature was suddenly at the glass with its hand splayed like a starfish on the pane. Eyes so close, the red wash turned to two dark pupils like coins. It didn't slam, it tapped 1, 2, 1, 2, like a kid drumming a counter. Then it opened its mouth and the little syringes inside telescoped forward just a fraction. I hadn't realized those were muscles until then. It was tasting the air, tasting us. Sue said very quietly, "Close your throat," as if the creature could pull vapor through glass. We backed up. We put the place into full containment. Cole called the transfer guys and told them to speed up. They said 4 hours. We told them to. They said they'd try. That meant we had the thing for sunset. Sunset, on a calm spring day in those woods, feels like someone setting a cup of ink into the tree line and letting it bleed. You don't get a clean edge to the dark, just a slow erasing. The second encounter, the one where it killed, wasn't cinematic. I want you to hear that because This is where stories turn into movies, and movies make people think they'd be brave. A half hour into containment, we pulled the blood draw through the hatch. We drank the negative pressure sleeve. The creature didn't fight that part. Maybe curious? We capped, sealed, passed it back to Sue. She looked at the color, and her face did a thing like a shutter closing. Hemolyzed, she said, doesn't close the same. She was explaining it to herself. At 6:14, the cell door indicator, just a little green LED, flickered. It shouldn't flicker. Those circuits are isolated, Quinn swore. He was across the room in 2 strides, crouched at the panel. It's not power, he said. It's static. Induced. He ran a diagnostic. Numbers ran. We watched. The lock stayed green. It should have been red. I went for the manual bar. You get into habits. When electronics hiccup, put metal between you and the awful. As I got there, the intercom squealed, feedback, sudden and needle sharp, and in that split second of flinch, the cell door popped. Not open, a quarter inch. Sometimes that's enough. The creature hit the gap with its fingers and pulled. We hit the door with shoulders and bar, shoving back. Latam was there with the second bar. Cole yelled for wedges. Alvarez moved to my right, with 1 foot against the wall for leverage. We were a line, pushing. The creature's arm was extended through the gap, up to the elbow. Not a grubbing reach, but surgical, wrist flexing like it wanted to map the space. Its skin was dry, not slimy, hot. It smelled like battery acid and musk. We held. Then the intercom squealed again, and the lights in the corridor went dim for a breath. Just a breath, and that was enough for the creature to do a trick. It flattened its hand and knifed it sideways, caught Miller's vest, and dragged him into the doorframe shoulder first. If you've ever had a door catch a spine, you know the sick electricity that shoots through your chest. He howled. The sound wasn't long, just punched out. He didn't let go of the bar. That's important. He didn't let go. We shoved hard, and the door kissed closed. The creature's fingers vanished. The wedge went in. Manual bolts through with a clack I wanted to marry. We backed off, stepping in unison like we practiced, just like it was a drill. Then we heard Ruben say, very calmly from behind us, I think it's learned the latch. He was looking not at the door, but at the viewing window. The creature was there and, it makes my mouth dry to say it, it had its hand on the little thumb turn we used to open the inner curtains. Just the curtain, not the door, but it had mapped the mechanism from watching us. We moved Ruben out and shut down the whole inner corridor. We took turns breathing, which you don't think about until you hear 4 or 5 humans trying to make their lungs quiet. Latam checked electrical again. Quinn rerouted again. Sue kept working like all she could do was give the thing a name. I respect that. Names save lives. Miller said he was fine, and then he wasn't. He slid down the wall, white around the mouth. Alvarez had him on the floor in a second, vest off checking. The door had pushed a rib hard, not broken but a problem. And the human at the center of a room is always what the worst part of the night wants. We made a call. Transfer early or transfer here. Cole said here. We didn't want to take it outside with the dark rising, so we got the secondary crate with the internal lock and we prepared the corridor. The plan was simple. Lower the small hatch in the main door, push a bait, a fresh blood bag, into the hinge corner to draw the creature's attention, then slam a shaped charge on the glass panel to blow it, shock, net, and move. You can hate that plan if you want. We weren't proud. We were out of perfect. The creature did what none of us accounted for. It stopped wanting us in that moment. It went quiet. Its spine settled. It moved to the far wall and pressed its head there, just above the floor, at the crack where the panel met concrete. Sue whispered, "No." I asked her why. She said, "Smell." I didn't smell anything beyond sweat and dust. Alvarez did. "Goat," she said, and her face drew down like a fist. There was a drain conduit in that wall. The maintenance guys had told us it was sealed, but you never trust a 30-year-old seal over an animal with time. It was small, smaller than the creature's head, but I had watched it compress a wrist, and the thought of compressing a skull isn't something I ever wanted to have. "It can't," I said, like wishing could be door bolts. Sue said, "It can." We tried to scare it from the grate with noise, side door slam, hammering, high-pitched tones. It didn't care. It had discovered a thread and would pull it until it either unraveled or broke its fingers. The stupid thing is, sometimes you admire the determination of the thing you hate. It's the same feeling as spotting your own reflection moving right in a window. Quinn switched to the underground cameras, the ones further back in the station's bone, and that's when we saw it again, a darker shape moving in a duct that shouldn't have had anything in it but dust and spider husks. Not our creature, another, smaller, or the same, repositioned? No, none of us had seen double on thermal. This was a second heat sign, loping around the cinder block like it owned the map. "I thought this was a single," Cole said. Sue didn't look up. "Lord doesn't say single," she answered. "That's us wanting it to be." The second one hit the outer camera grid like a screwdriver to a music box. 3 screens went dead. The goats outside, where we'd set the initial bait, bleated once, silence after, then a sound like a hose sucking empty. Ruben said, "We are between them." He said it like a professor writes on a chalkboard. The kill came fast and nowhere near where we thought. The inner intercom clicked, spit static, and then picked up the distant modest sound of shoes. Not ours, a runner from the transfer team who'd arrived early and decided to surprise us in the wrong corridor. He turned the corner on camera, and the smaller creature dropped out of a ceiling hatch like a sack of wet rope. He didn't scream. You don't, not when your throat goes first. He went to his knees with his hands to his neck, like there was something there to hold. There wasn't anything left to pressure. He took the blood without mess, efficient. I do this job and still couldn't move for 2 seconds. That felt like a year. We moved then. Hard. We sealed that corridor. Cole swore in a way I'd never heard him swear. Alvarez made a sound like she was breathing all the air in the room and saving some for later. Quinn locked doors until the map of our station looked like a child's scribble. 2, I said out loud. 2. The word tasted like a mistake. Not 2, Sue said, and I hated her for it because she meant if the lore ranges from island to desert to these wet woods, and we never see the young, and the thing learns faster than our cameras can squint, how sure are you that 2 is the right number? We were trying to solve a math problem in a burning house. I won't draw you a diagram of the next hour. It was moving from door to door, setting up small traps, resetting them when the creatures learned, listening to vents, closing vents, hearing the soft, not voices they made, high-pulsed, almost conversational like bats gossiping while they work. We got lucky in 2 ways. First, the smaller one was the one that liked their wiring more, so it kept testing the panel spaces and chewing cable, and we could predict that curiosity better than hunger. Second, the big one, the one we'd caught first, was the one that was territorial. When the smaller one came too close to the cell wall, it did something like a head bump, butting thump. There was a hierarchy we could exploit. Write that down. The difference between intelligence and instinct is a tool shaped like an understanding. Cole made a call. We'd flood the cell's power panels with CO2 through the fire suppression port, force the big one to climb, open the ceiling and use a vacuum pole on the upper duct to pin it there against the mesh. At the same time, we'd lure the smaller one into the drainage gallery with blood scent, then seal and gas that corridor with halon on a timer. Not a chemical I like. Kills pilots and mechanics as easily as it kills engine fires. But here, with doors and hoods and the count, it was the least worst lever. Bait? Quinn asked. I looked at the surviving goat. It looked back at me with eyes like polished stones. I hate this part, I do. We didn't use it. I cut my palm and squeezed into a bag. Alvarez shot me a look and taped me up with a dexterity I envied. We dripped a line to the grate, like a little red breadcrumb pat. You could feel the station holding its breath. It worked and it didn't. The smaller one followed scent like a river, body low, spines down. We put the halon on a slow fill so it wouldn't startle. It went all the way, incautious, testing air, but committed to the trail. I hit the seal, the door sucked shut. A light went from green to amber to red. My blood felt cold as if the halon had reached the wrong room. Through a small window, we watched it puzzle the invisible problem. It went slow, it sagged, it lay down like a dog. The big one, the one in the cell, didn't climb like we thought. It went not up, but into the place where walls meet floor, pressing into the seam until its ribs did a thing ribs should never do. We rammed the CO2. Its spines lifted in a ring. Sparks walked along them. The camera glitched and died. Then the window, our good window, polycarbonate and air gap, and my measuring tape quivered. Not cracked, quivered. Like something middled between sound and forced and made the pain dance. Sue whispered, resonance. I heard terror around the word, not because of the physics, but because it meant the creature had found a way to turn the station into an instrument it could play. I don't know if you ever had your body choose for you, but there's a way your feet put you where you need to be when you are out of ideas. Mine took me to the manual release for the roof hatch. We don't have net coverage up there, Cole said, which was his way of asking if I'd lost my mind. I hadn't lost it, I was betting it. Up is the only direction it's not planning for, I said. We get light, all of it. Light doesn't kill anything that isn't fungus or bacteria. But in the files from Puerto Rico, there are notes about the way villagers used the open to make the creature break off. It didn't like the sky when it had a wall to press. Maybe superstition, maybe something in its eyes that made open sky a flood of too much information. Maybe it just wanted a ceiling. I know that feeling. Going through the roof cams to the big screen. I hit the crank. The hatch moaned like a whale in a narrow bay. Fresh air dropped into the station like a small miracle. Above us, dusk went to night fast, a purple bruise turning black. I ran. Up the service ladder, across the gravel. The roof smelled like tar and cedar smoke. The forest was louder up there, little things moving like big things. Behind me, the cell door bang echoed. The window hadn't broken. The resonance trick had wobbled our bolts enough for the big one to push through a seam at the bottom and roll into the corridor. It was out. I saw it in my mind before I saw it on a camera. The way it would flatten against the wall and slide. "Roof," Cole said on comms, but his voice wasn't in my ear. It was in the bones of my head, because I'd forgotten my earpiece on the table when I moved. I stood on that roof alone, with a piece of rebar in my hands, like I was going to fence shadows. That's when I felt the hatch vibrate under my feet, the smaller one, still awake enough to think, testing the edge of the exterior ladder. The Haugen slowed it, didn't stop it. Things that want a thing will make chemistry a hallway, not a wall. I don't have a pretty way to describe the next 3 minutes. The big one came into the open, popping out of the roof access like a grey hand. It hit the air and froze, spines fully up, eyes too wide, mouth open to drink the night. Not liking the sky. That part of the lore was real. It hated it. It didn't scream. It hissed in a sound like 1,000 small leaks. I moved toward it, because sometimes forward is the only direction you have that isn't called die. It backed along the gravel, looking for shadow. The little one thumped the hatch under my feet, like a fish hitting the inside of a boat. I planted. I toppled the floodlight rig toward the hatch. Its steel frame landed across the opening and pinned the hatch half open. "Sam," Cole said, real voice this time, because he'd made the roof too, and he was 20 feet away with a shotgun. Not a slug, a tube full of rubber buckshot and bean bags. Less lethal. We were still thinking capture. He fired. The big one flinched like nothing. The small one shoved again under my boots and almost had my right ankle. I stomped. It hissed, a ripped paper hiss, and withdrew. "Lights," I said. "All of them." Quinn must have been listening because the station below pulsed up into ridiculous brightness. Every flood we had, every panel, every portable pointed to the sky. It made a hemisphere of white light above the station, like a blown bubble. The big one bunched itself smaller. It did what cornered animals do when they hate the world. It chose a direction with the least sky and sprang. I made it with the rebar because there wasn't anything else to do. I don't recommend rebar against a thing with a mouth that looks like a hardware store. But steel is steel, and the fulcrum is a gift. I jammed sideways, not in, because I didn't want the bar to become a straw. I used its weight against its own speed. It climbed my shoulder like a bat, and my arm went numb to the fingers. It landed, twisted, sprang again for the hatch, where there was something like shade. Cole fired again. The beanbag didn't stop it, but it adjusted the angle of that jump by a foot. And that foot put its hand not on the hatch, but on the light rig's hot ballast. Skin sizzled. The smell was like meat on a coil. The creature jerked back, and in the animal calculus of pain, a new instruction flashed. Not that way. It turned away from the hatch. At the edge of the roof, the drop was 20 feet to a concrete path. Then forest. Then everything. I shouted no. Not because I care if a monster gets hurt, but because I understand that losing it to the trees then would mean 3 months of bodies. It stopped, not because I yelled, because something in the station below made a sound that cut through its anger like a bell through fog. That sound was the goats. The smaller one, dazed and furious from the Haugen, had dragged itself into the equipment room where we'd stored the bait crate. The goats made that soft dump living noise. The big one tilted its head, and every inch of its body pointed toward that noise, like a magnet found its pole. "Down," I said to Cole, to the creature, to myself. It worked. It always works. Gravity and hunger are the only two rules. We chased it down the ladder, through air, that felt too used. The big one moved like a rumor through the corridor, and we followed it like people who were about to get caught behind a story. We reached the equipment room in time to see it do something like tenderness. It put one hand against the crate and the other hand to the latch. I didn't know if you're religious, but I prayed mechanically then, for hinges, for timers, for gas densities, for old gaskets, for men who mount doors straight. Sometimes prayer is just a list of things you hope work the way the manual said. I hit the Haugen in that room too. We did it from 2 points. The air went thin. The goats went down fast. The big one hesitated. You could see language move in it, and then decision chain clicking faster than you'd think bone and sinew could compute. It turned towards us. I had a thing in my hand that we don't usually talk about because it's not pretty and it's not something we use unless nothing else answers. It's a lance with an igniter, a flashbang married to a flameless heat spike. It turns oxygen to trouble in a 1-meter cone. It cooks air. Think of it like a last word in a language no one wants to speak. I triggered it. The big one took a step in and then a step back and then tried to breathe. It couldn't. It went low, the way a dog will crawl under a bed when thunder fails it. It tried to press its head into the seam again, forcing skull against concrete. That's when I realized something that no file had put plain. These things aren't ghosts or folklore. They're animals with tricks. They're brave until they aren't. They breathe the same air and choke on the same lack. It fell with a sound like a carpet collapsing. The smaller one, in the other corridor, was a silent shape on the floor. We waited. I want that part in the record, the waiting. We didn't rush in and stomp triumph around. We watched on camera for 5 minutes, while the Haugen bled down through vents and the CO2 in the cell dispatched and the alarms went back to greens instead of anger. Then we masked, we checked, and we went to our knees beside bodies with spines like razors and mouths like nightmares, and we worked a checklist. That is a word you must earn. We bagged them, we sealed the bags, we put them in the secondary holders, the ones for hazardous items that don't belong to any chemical chart. We cleaned the floors with bleach until the place smelled like a swimming pool. We peeled gloves and counted breaths. We counted heads twice because the brain needs repetition to trust. And when it was finally quiet enough that you could hear the river out there again, Cole said, "Miller?" Miller managed a thumb up from the far bench where Alvarez had strapped him. "Next time," he said, his voice wrecked, "let's hunt deer." We laughed like we'd been underwater and found our mouths again. The transfer team came. We signed paper you'd find boring to read and impossible to forget writing. Sue took her vials. Ruben said something about myth evolving. I told him to take that thought to a classroom instead of our van. He nodded like he'd been gently smacked by a truth he'd earned. I slept in the back of the van for an hour with my vest under my head. The way you do when nobody has anything left to say, but your bones want to be near other bones that survived. We drove out under a sky so clear, the stars looked like pinholes in a paper. Calm, spring, the kind of night that makes the day look like a lie. You want a moral? I don't have one. I have a couple of facts and a feeling. Fact: the lore about chupacabras starts where goats start dying. It stretches across islands and deserts and forests because whatever sits at the center of that story isn't geography, it's biology. Something that knows how to take blood clean, something that learns your doors, something that doesn't roar and swagger but studies, waits, and then reaches through the small precise place where you were sure you were sealed. Fact: we didn't find the hikers. We found what was left of two in a drainage run 3 miles from the station. The kind of find that makes grown men do their work without talking for a day and a half. That's the part I don't tell people who want a tidy ending. Sometimes stopping the thing is the only kindness left. The feeling? It's this. When I stood on that roof and the sky made the creature small for a second, I had the thought that maybe the only thing that keeps any of us from becoming a culvert of bad decisions is the open. Friends under open sky. A plan said out loud. A way for the light to hit your eyes so wide you can't focus on the seam in the corner where trouble lives. We wrote our reports. I got back to Wichita and found my gym felt too bright and too safe, and that I preferred it that way. I read a few more files. Turns out in the early 19th, a team like ours closed off a wellhead near Salinas after someone reported bats the size of dogs. The notes were sparse and smug in the way old notes get when the men who wrote them think the world's licked. 2 lines mattered. Specimen used electrical interference to stall cameras. And siblings? With a circle so hard it tore the paper. Would I go back out there? Yes, because if we don't, things like that don't care if you say their name or not. They still come. We got lucky. We had all concrete and new light, and a team that didn't break when a door tried to. That's what it took. Next time it will be different. It always is. That's the account, true and plain as I can make it. People will say it sounds like a story because it has a beginning and a middle and an end, because it moves the way a good lies moves. I'll tell you the piece that doesn't fit stories because it's too small. When you loaded the goats back into the farmer's trailer, the surviving one looked at me and chewed like a bored tourist. The tiniest snot bubble crept out of one nostril. It popped. That's real. That's how the world shrugs after a night like that. It keeps chewing. It keeps popping. Me? I kept my earpiece on now. I keep a hand on the manual bar before my shoulders against the door. And when the lights in the store flicker while I'm buying coffee, I look at the ceiling without meaning to, and I hold my breath for a count I never used to need. If you're asking because you're thinking about hiking up there this spring, take your trail map, tell someone your routes, and don't linger in the calm. Calm makes your ears go lazy. Calm is where you hear the wrong kind of tapping and think it's just the building settling. It isn't, always.